My university was bisected by a big lake, with a bridge going across it with an island gazebo in the middle. One night I was walking down the side of the lake about to cross the bridge to go to a dorm on the other side. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I noticed some kid in a gray/white hoodie, with the hood up, walking across the section of the bridge on my side of the gazebo, towards my sidewalk. I didn't think anything of him, until I walked by a big tree which blocked my line of sight for a second. When I got past the tree, I happened to glance back at the bridge, and there was no one there. He couldn't have possibly walked off the bridge, he would have had to go right by me, and if he had turned around in the split second I couldn't see him, he wouldn't have had any time to get all the way back to the island, either. He was just gone. This gets creepier. About a year later, I was about to tell this story to my friend who had been abroad that semester. He'd never heard it, and before I even got to what I saw, he cut in with, "Wait, did you see a guy in a hoodie disappear?" Yes, he had seen something just like this freshman year. Effing weird. I hated walking across that bridge alone from there on out. When I was younger we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house. Scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by she was watching out the windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween one of the cousins dared us to trick or treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging noises in the house suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the door she had a severed head in her hands and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents' and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived BTW but has a long scar across her neck. TL, doctor, while trick or treating I was chased off by someone holding a real, severed human head. My wife and I buy our first house in February of 2010. We immediately fell in love with it as soon as we laid eyes on it. It had everything we wanted and plus a few extras. For the first month, everything was great. Lots of painting and decorating, getting it just the way we wanted. Then, weird things started to randomly happen. First it was small things, like things upstairs being moved, put in completely different rooms than where they belonged. I chalked it up to my wife just forgetting to put things back where they belonged. The house also started to creak, pretty loud. This is a fairly new house, so I just figured it was probably settling, as most new houses tend to do. One day, the wife and I was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Our stairs sit right next to the kitchen entrance, so any noises upstairs were clearly audible into the kitchen. I turned off the water at the sink and as soon as I did, we both heard a cough. We have no kids and no one was visiting. The windows were all shut, the television was not on. This sent the coldest chill down my spine and I could feel the blood running out of my face. I looked to my wife and she too had gone pale and had this look of absolute fear. Someone was in our house and they were upstairs. I quickly grabbed the sharpest knife I could find and my wife called the police. I walked to the bottom of the steps and stood silently and heard a loud pop/creak, just like the ones I had always heard the house make. My hands were shaking and my wife was whispering to the 911 operator, telling them we think we may have a robber in our home. The police arrive in minutes. Thankfully, they had been patrolling nearby. The officer walks slowly up the stairs, gun drawn. He calls out, "This is the police, is anyone upstairs?" No response. I'm right behind him, walking up the stairs. We look into the first bedroom and closet. Empty. No one in the half bath either. Last room is my office where I have my PC. No one in the room or the closet. I felt the tension ease away and felt like a complete tool, making this officer search the house, only to find nothing. We turned to walk out of the room and right above us, creak. I just about shat bricks. In my office closet, there is an attic access. The officer pulls the steps down and again calls out, "Is anyone up there?" This is the police. No response. He turns on his flashlight and peeks his head up. He finds a man, in his 40s, kneeling there in the attic, looking dead at him. Gun drawn, he tells the man to come out and put his hands behind his head. They arrest the man. He didn't say a word the whole time and would not look anyone in the eye. He was scruffy looking and had dirty clothes on. Me and my wife were freaking out. I don't think either of us have fully gotten over it. After questioning the man in the police station, we found out that he was a homeless man who found refuge in the house while it was still on the market. He said the doors were unlocked and so he stayed there. Apparently, a realtor must have forgotten to lock the door after showing someone the house. He said that when people would come to the house, he would hide in the second-floor attic. We bought the house, and this guy was living in it for a whole month, without us even knowing. It really freaks me out still just thinking about it. TL, doctor, don't shrug off all those bumps in the night, you could have a homeless man living in your attic. When I was a freshman in college I was on a film shoot near Barstow on Route 66. We were shooting on the property of the cafe known for the film Baghdad Cafe. This property has an abandoned motel attached to it, which is where we were shooting this unbelievably bad horror film. The motel's floor was full of papers, something I initially figured was a relic from the past, while the motel was actually doing business. A while into the shoot, we started picking up the papers and reading them. They were handwritten letters from the 70s, perhaps never sent. They were addressed to dozens of different people, starting out normal, but going on to describe some really messed up things. This was a guy who literally had some demons. He kept talking about how they were watching him and the like. The handwriting also got more and more messed up as we assembled the letters chronologically. Meanwhile, outside the motel there was a storage container with "Keep Out" spray painted on it. Naturally, we were curious. There was a hole in the side, and someone reached in and pulled out some documents. Among them was a letter, on government typeface, I think it was the VA, telling the person who wrote those crazy letters that he was, unknowingly, a participant of some tests of hallucinogenic substances while he was in the army. This whole time, there was a room in the abandoned motel that was sealed off, that we were strictly forbidden from entering. All the windows were covered by plywood, and the door was barricaded shut. It smelled like death. Seriously, the worst smell I've ever encountered in my life. I don't have any way to verify whether this is actually a family story or whether it's an urban legend, but here, my family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century, disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods. So an aunt of some unknown number of greats preceding her relationship to me dies of some disease and she gets buried in the family cemetery on the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral the two dogs stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it when, a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave. They were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw and bloody and mangled from where, on the inside of the casket door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. I'm a kid who likes his sleep very much, so my dad often had to wake me up as I slept through my alarm. He wakes me up the same way every time, by gently putting a hand on my shoulder, and then since I usually plead for 5 more minutes, he yanks the covers off and forces me up. So a few weeks ago I had to get up very early to go play pickup basketball in the morning with some friends. I set my alarm the night before and went to sleep. My dad works very far away, so he often sleeps at work 2 or 3 nights a week, and that night he wasn't sleeping at home, so I knew I had to get myself up. I eventually fall asleep and I then wake up to a hand on my shoulder, murmur the usual 5 more minutes, and then I feel the covers yanked off me all the way off the bed. I shot up out of bed because it was habit at this point, because this is when I knew my dad was serious. I opened my eyes and it was pitch black in my room and nobody was there. I looked around and saw nothing. Just the lights on my clock that said it was 2:30 in the morning. I was a little more than slightly freaked out. I asked my mom in the morning if my dad had came home, but she said no, he had stayed at work. TL, doctor, something woke me the F up in the middle of the night and yanked all the covers off my bed, but nothing was there. I had a similar experience. My boyfriend and I stayed in this hotel that had been converted from an early 20th century factory. Don't know how relevant this is. We turned the lights off to sleep that night, and he dozed right off. This frustrated me, because I had hoped on getting laid. So, I sat there turned away from him trying to sleep, to no avail. Suddenly he puts his hand gently on my shoulder and whispers in my ear, "So, you wanna come over here?" I turned around and saw nothing but his back, him fast asleep. I started hyperventilating, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face. Took him about an hour to calm me down enough to sleep, but I will never forget that as long as I live. Ever since I was really little, my family has always encountered really weird ghostly phenomenon. The house we live in now has been the worst by far, however, with an almost constant stream of events happening. One of the stories that always freaks people out the most is that there was this little girl who knew our names and would approach us all at different times. One night I was asleep and I heard a knocking on my door and a girl's voice saying, "Dean 2JX, open the door. Let me in, I want to play. Open the door." At first I thought it was my sister, but as I woke up I realized it was a much younger girl's voice. I sat there silently freaking the fuck out, until it eventually stopped, but just as I was about to go haul ass into my sister's room, there was a relentless pounding on the 2 separate doors that enter my room and this little girl screaming with laughter saying, "I know you're in there. Let me in." After a few minutes I just ended up yelling, "Stop it," and then the pounding stopped. The next morning my mom and my sister, who I hadn't told, were talking about strange footsteps and giggling sounds all throughout the house, but neither of them had heard any pounding or me yelling.